Welcome to Paper Cuts and Plot Twists, where the paper is dangerous and the plots are twisted.
Paper cuts, what's the risk? Just another day in the life, just another plot twist. But is it a tragedy, a comedy, romantasy, just another fantasy? It's paper cuts and plot twists. The rest we'll wait and see.
Welcome back to Paper Cuts and Plot Twists. This is episode 8. And what are we talking about today? That's right, space opera. I feel like we inevitably led to this moment with all of the previous discussions. We're right here, right now, in the final frontier that is space. Before we go any further, I want to shout out a couple of people that are doing amazing things and you've heard from already. So our friend Scott, he just published his first book, Paul Scott Grill, and it's called Travel by Star. He was the one in our high noon-ish, and he was sharing about the Western and why we're continuing to use that genre and why it's such an important genre to the American mindset as far as literature is concerned and why people still are drawn into that literature. He had really great insight, so definitely go listen back to that one, which was, see if this is 8, 7, it was episode 6, high noonish. So go listen to him and you can hear about his insight, but also you can go to Amazon and purchase his book. So shout out to him. And then in our last episode, episode 7, we were talking about Lost in Translation and we had a commercial, which we're going to be doing more opportunities in the future in the podcast and next season to offer those who have small businesses or small projects to join with us. And so we're going to try to support them and give sponsorship opportunities. And so Danica was gracious enough to give us a little bit of a commercial for her Indiegogo campaign. And the reason I wanted to bring this up today is because she is successful in reaching her Indiegogo campaign. And so I just want to thanks to everyone who supported her and was able to go out to it and, purchase one of the Indiegogo offerings for her book that she is going to work now towards publishing. And so based on whatever you chose, you'll be getting that according to the agreement there. But she reached her goal, and that is why we're here. So as King Ari Press, that's our dream, is just to get more stories out in the world, however we can do it. And we have amazing authors ourselves. You can go to kingaripress.com and check out all of our authors right there. You can get their books, and their links to their books are all on our website. You can find them on Amazon, and they would love it if you supported them and read their awesome stories. I selected their stories for a reason because I believed in it. I was moved by it. I was intrigued by it. I was curious. I was drawn into their stories and compelled by their imagination and just the way they painted their worlds in unusual ways. And then there's even the stories behind the stories for each of those authors, and it's compelling. So I hope you get a chance to check out our website, kingaripress.com, and check out our stories, Annabelle's Lion, Truth, A Story of Canry New West, and Daughter of God, The Orphan. All of our authors are amazing people that you're going to be seeing more from in the future, which I can't wait. Congratulations to Danica for reaching her Indiegogo goal. That's awesome. So we celebrate and congratulate her on her success, which is going to be a lot of work, actually. Now the real work starts and the future of her book is in process. And then to our also fellow writer, author, and friend who was friend of this podcast, friend of the press, we're so excited that your book is out, and I can't wait to read it. Travel by Star, out now by Paul Scott Grill. So please go check that out. Check out our books at kingaripress.com. And with that, let's have a little bit of an opera. The year is 1985. Ewoks, the creature you never imagined, was on the little screen, premiering first on ABC November 24th, 1985. Following the success and end of the trilogy known as Star Wars. When I was a little girl, I remember one story standing out in my mind. This was before I was ever in elementary school, and that was Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Now, I didn't have curly hair. I always wanted it, but my mom would put my hair in curlers, and I'd imagine myself as Goldilocks. Something about that story, her trying to find the right bed and falling asleep and the bears come home, like, bears were people. I mean, that was strange in itself. But the really big thing about it was my dad would always read me a story at night from golden books, or he'd just tell them by memory. And I think it was Goldilocks and the Three Bears that I took from his hands, partly because I didn't want to go to sleep, and partly because I just love a good story and I didn't want the story to end. So I told him the story back, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, in my version, holding the book upside down. But I'd heard it enough at that point that I could really remember most of the story. As I got older and tried to think about Goldilocks and why she was there, and the porridge too cold, too hot, just right. The bed too lumpy, too hard, just right. And all of her choices just to find the just right thing. And what a perfect story to read at bedtime when you're in that just right pose right before sleep. You're comfortable. Your dad's tucking you in and telling you these stories, and you're just imagining this wonderful, quaint little world that's not at all frightening or scary, but bears are, and they don't live in houses. They live in caves, and I think if you visited one, they sleep on the stone. I don't think they're on a cozy bed, but then I wonder if they had a choice, would they? I don't know. But as a little girl, when Ewoks: The Battle for Endor released, it seems much like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So we've talked about fantasy. We've talked about the way that the forest and storytelling from the perspective of fairy tales and Aesop's fables, those things that we would tell kids and they would, imagine this world, or it would be like poetically rhythmic, or telling the moral of the tale, don't burn down the house because then bad things will happen. The true fairy tale to scare the kids straight. And now we're at this epic, the epic of time. We're in the final frontier. And we've gone down this road to high noonish, where we're in an American frontier now. We're in a land that, while people were here, we are discovering new lands and new ways to live and expanding from the east to the west in differing ways, whether good or bad. The reality is developing cities and communities that never existed in those places before and in that way. And yeah, so were other communities and things that had moved on. And, there was a lot of transitional communities. But to many in the East who didn't even really know this part of the world existed, the whole world is flat theory, while I have some reservations on how many people actually believe that, I'm not going to get into this, partly because it's still an ongoing debate. I'm not here to judge that, critique it. That's not where I'm going with this. But collectively, we called this America, the movement to the west, to the shore of the Pacific Ocean, that Western Sea, the one that Sacagawea herself wanted to finally see, to stand at its shores and to see the Great Sea, and was able to do so, the final frontier. And even when we discussed Narnia and Aslan's land, and where I believe it's the voyage of John Treader, Reepicheep, he dreams of going to this land, and they're at the seas at the end of the world. And we see this in Tolkien, the theme of the final sea, where you go off into this horizon to these heavens, to these other shores, these eternal shores. But then there's this other side, this other frontier that had not yet been explored. But yet it's one that we've been looking at since the very beginning. We've been looking up. We've been looking out. We have been judging time by the stars, seasons by the stars, prophecy by the stars. The grand opera of humanity is written in the stars. And then welcome Star Wars to reveal to us, to show us really that there is another final frontier. There is another place that exists beyond these lands, and it's up and it's out and it's vast. And, incidentally, may smell like raspberries. What it sounds like, I don't know, but maybe they're singing. Maybe there's a sound, a tone that reverberates through the universe. A word spoken at the beginning of creation. Let there be light. We don't know the reality of what it'll take to live outside this planet yet. But it is on the mindset where fiction is meeting reality, because we're talking about Mars in a very real and practical way. We have trips to outer space and a space station. As a matter of fact, in the very recent near history, we had 2 American astronauts stranded on the space station much longer than maybe they should have been, and they were just rescued. And it's actually very difficult for them to live in outer space for any length of time because what it does to be untethered from gravity. And yet fiction has taken us there. Fiction has taken us right into the grand opera of space. So for me as a kid, reading Goldilocks and the Three Bears, I loved Ewoks, the Battle for Endor. I imagined that world. I can't tell you, like, I could do all the research about it, but in some ways I don't want to do all the research about that story. I just remember what it was like as a kid, these cuddly little bears. So, like, in my mind, those are probably the more closely the bear in the Goldilocks and the Three Bears story than the scary ones that live in caves and get kind of grumpy because they haven't eaten and come out in the spring and are just yelling at everybody because they need food because they're just starving and they've been hibernating for the winter. So seeing Ewoks, and I remember because it was on television, I just remember watching it, and that really related to me more than Star Wars. I think it was a really good entry point as a kid, because it had the fondness of the Star Wars. You got the hint of that, but then it also had that fairy tale aspect, that fantasy aspect. And here we are somewhere in outer space on Endor, and there's this whole culture and creature, and this little girl is trying to kind of maneuver through all of this. And she's got, what does she have? Blonde, curly hair. She's literally Goldilocks. So you can see that all of these stories have layering to them. Everything we've talked about, stories layer in together. So why call this episode Space Opera? There are so many really great imagined stories of outer space. I read the Red Rising series, which I think is a good series, especially when we talk about like life on Mars. There are some interesting concepts. And I find that fiction also does this thing where it's not intentionally predictive, but there's a science mindedness to it, a research and curiosity that leads them to certain conclusions that science and innovation actually follows. And then we end up going to outer space because our President Kennedy, we're going to go and land a man on the moon. And that becomes like the mantra. And, we could debate the conspiracies around that or not. Again, it's not the conversation today, but an interesting one. The point is, the push for outer space, the space race, was a real thing. How could we have imagined it prior to this? And then you get movies like Star Wars, but we also had, stories about outer space, and usually it was from alien attacks coming into Earth and, taking it over or attacking us for some reason. But here now we actually have this moving outward in the battle, like it's many years past anybody being on the Earth, and they're fighting each other. And here's where we get the opera, this grand dramatic, because it feels very Greek. It feels very Roman. It feels like the plays of old, the Oedipus complex, the Electra complex. You have Luke fighting with this villain, Darth Vader, and it's his father. And that girl that's kind of cute and funny, she's actually your twin sister, but then you were separated at birth. And the parents that you thought they were the aunt and uncle and they were killed. And you're like this secret Jedi and you come from this really powerful family you didn't even know. And you're trying to figure it out and your dad cuts off your hand. And now you're falling to your death and you get captured and, you're safe, but still. It's dramatic. It's operatic. Even Luke, I am your father. Like that declaration has a musicality to it. I mean, of course, it sounds amazing when we listen to it, and it gets tattooed in the brain and the mind. Luke, I am your father. And it's that breathing, and you get I can't do it. I'm so sorry. Like, please, you didn't come here to, I think you should just go listen to the clip. That'll probably make you feel better after you just heard me say it because it's not gonna satisfy in the way the real clip actually. But here we are. This is an opera. This has all of the drama. It has, and there's fighting, except instead of swords, it's with ships and lasers, but there is swords and they're lightsabers. And yet, it's still replicating out of this, but now it's light because we're talking about the dark versus the light and finding balance in the force and all of this drama, the fight between the comedy and the tragedy, the Oedipus complex, the Electra complex. Because the truth is, humanity's tales, wherever they're set, are humanity's stories. It's the human condition. We can go back to episode 1 and talk about, again, moral dilemma. We can talk about how we're choosing between this comedy or this tragedy. Ultimately, it's the two. The happy ending, the transcending of the happy ending, or the justice of tragedy, that it all fades and justice will out. And there's an interplay between it. And this is where we get the drama, the dramatic. This is where we get the woman singing her heart out, her brokenness. We get the chorus that comes out and relays the information, much like the opening scene of Star Wars, where you have the tale of what was happened. The chorus is singing out through outer space. Radio waves are being carried through outer space. And speaking of the Orson Welles radio broadcast, War of the Worlds, and everybody's somewhat unnecessary fear had they heard the whole broadcast, but still it was done so well. And when a story is told really well, you feel it. Because this goes back to another reason for like operas, for the Greek and Roman tragedies. Is there a catharsis for our feelings, for what we're struggling with in the most extreme forms? So whether you're going to set the stage for this final frontier, when you bring humanity into it, you bring human feelings, human drama, struggles, love, different masks, the same feelings. And you can paint these other characters, but you're still personifying them. You're personifying the Wookiee. You're giving him backstory. The tragedy of the Wookiee and the Wookiee culture, his planet destroyed. This lone survivor traveling through space, fighting against this oncoming darkness, against everything Darth Vader stands for. The stand-in villain that the world rejects and fights against, and yet somehow can justify his feelings, his rationale, bringing order to the universe. I mean, we see that in the Avengers and the Endgame, superhero stories that inevitably end in outer space. They're not just superheroes for here. They can do out of this world type of things, and we need them. Which, you know what? It also sounds like somebody else that we know. Even Superman, wherever he came from, wherever he's going, he comes to America to save the world. Well, who is Superman, really? You can't escape it because we've been looking for Superman forever. It's part of the history. It's part of the stars. It's part of this. The universe is speaking and we're listening to it. And it goes right back to the wise men who traversed from east to Israel to pay homage to a king that was written and born, that was written about, who was born in Israel, was proclaimed as the King of the Jews. And these wise men saw it written in the stars, and they followed that star. And the star showed them where he was, and he was otherworldly. He wasn't just a man. I mean, again, we could debate Immaculate Conception or not. You can choose to believe it or not. But they did. They believed something of this king. And maybe in their mind, they didn't see the fullness of who he was. The people closest to him didn't. But he is ultimately Superman, otherworldly, Son of God, King of the universe, Lord of all the lords. He came from somewhere else to redeem mankind, or his redemption is false. So we continue with these ideas of things bigger than us, outside of us. And when we go back to even the Genesis story, the world isn't created from within itself. Genesis accounts for the world is created from something that which exists outside of it and calls it into existence. The universe is created at the word of God. So all of this grand drama, all of this grand opera that exists in humanity's heart, right at the heart of who we are, right in the center of our being. That is the universe. That's the living, breathing universe, wherever it is, wherever we take it. So whether we're telling the story here or we settle another world or we find and discover a world that has other creatures in it, which we've imagined so many times before, we will never separate from our own human drama. We'll never separate from our own opera. We will always deal with the same things we've always dealt with because it's human, because it's our story, because these are our stories. And whether you go to the final frontier or you stay here, this grand drama is our own. And I'm excited to introduce Robin. Robin Riback is writing a book that's also set in outer space. I'm going to let you hear from her. She's going to share her thoughts on this topic, and she has some insight, believe me. And I actually can't wait for her book to come out too. So I was really excited to share with you our friends that have had their releases, our authors who have had their releases, everything King Ari Press is doing, and then also our friend Robin, who I'd like to give the vocal stage to. She's going to share about this because it's a topic that's very close to the book that she's writing. And so she has some great insight for you. And so please welcome Robin to this. And if you'd like to follow her on her social media, we will give you more of that information on Spotify that you can click the links and go directly to her. And with that, welcome, Robin.
Stephanie, thank you for inviting me to join you here on Paper Cuts and Plot Twists to talk about what books influence me as a reader and as a writer. I'm thinking a lot about this now as I'm doing a final edit to my debut science fiction novel. There are a lot of poems, novels, and well-written children's books that have taken hold of me and never let go. I tend to gravitate toward modern and contemporary Western literature with a little sprinkling of Victorian poetry. In fact, 4 books that have had a big impact on me and I continue to keep in my head and heart are the following. First, there was a popular children's series, Little House on the Prairie. This is Laura Ingalls Wilder's semi-autobiographical story about her journey as a pioneer girl as she travels from Wisconsin to Kansas in a covered wagon. I read every one of those books when I was little, and I got so immersed in the stories that they felt like real life to me. I wanted to be an adventurous prairie girl too. And then there's Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. Listen to her voice. She writes, "And all the lives we ever lived, and all the lives to be, are full of trees and changing leaves." And now hear her describe a morning. So fine was the morning, except for a streak of wind here and there, that the sea and sky looked all one fabric, as if the sails were stuck up high in the sky, or the clouds had dropped down to the sea. And I'll never forget reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland for the first time. His poem begins with the well-known verse, "April is the cruelest month," breeding lilacs out of the dead, mixing memory and desire. Then later in his epic, he gives us a glimpse of life and death with prison and palace and reverberation, of thunder, of spring over distant mountains. He who was living is now dead. We who were living are now dying, with a little patience. And last, but certainly not least, is a book I read more recently, and that is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. That's Amor Towles. It is a gripping story and a vivid narration about a former aristocrat imprisoned in Russia's Metropole Hotel during the Bolshevik Revolution. You may have watched the TV series, which was excellent, but believe you me, the book was even better, and you need to read it. Now, I have to admit, it was hard for me to choose a top 4 because there are so many beautifully written books. I'm going to briefly talk about other works that continue to grip me and inspire my writing style today. Let's start with the modernist authors who wrote between 1920 and 1940. So there's the wonderful children's book Madeline by Ludwig Bemelmans. It's a story in rhyming poetry about a brave little girl who lives in an orphanage. Then there's William Faulkner's poetically written narrative, As I Lay Dying. And rounding out my favorite modernists is E. E. Cummings' lilting, whimsical poem, Anyone Lived in a Pretty How Town. Now, let's move on to contemporary writing, all post-World War II. Again, early on, 2 children's books nurtured my love of reading, and they are Marguerite de Angelis' Door in the Wall and Richard Adams' Watership Down. Both books take young people on incredible journeys. Oh yes, that's another one, The Incredible Journey by Sheila Burnford. Other narratives that swim around in my brain include Marge Piercy's Woman on the Edge of Time, Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove series, and George R.R. Martin's Fire and Ice, aka Game of Thrones. All three have world building and atmospheres that are so precise and detailed, the writing is nearly perfect. Well, in my opinion, anyway. And finally, there's the poetry of Maya Angelou, Adrienne Rich, Langston Hughes, and a Beat Generation writer, Allen Ginsberg. These poets pack their poem with metaphor and intensity. Oh, and remember that sprinkling of Victorian poetry I mentioned? I meant Emily Dickinson's poem Because I Could Not Stop for Death and William Blake's Tiger, Tiger, which I pay tribute to in my upcoming book. So I'll end here by saying that I hope some of my favorites are yours too, and that all the books and poems I talked about continue to influence and affect my writing today as I complete my book entitled Miss Infinity. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, for being here. You were the first person I thought of when I came up with the topic space opera, and it's going to fit right into your sci-fi novel, I hope. It was the perfect topic for you, and thank you for doing it justice. And for those listening, if you would like to find out more about Robin's debut sci-fi novel, you can subscribe to her Miss Infinity newsletter she hosts on her LinkedIn business page. You can also find her at Robin's Substack, and that includes short stories, humor pieces, advice geared towards the writing community, which is great advice, by the way. I love reading her insight, as well as information about her upcoming book. Her Substack handle is at Robin Riback. That's at, and then ROBIN RIBACK. And she's also active on the X Twitter writing community. You can also follow her at the same, at Robin Riback. And her website is robinriback.com. I think this topic was great, and Robin did justice to it, of course. To wrap up my thoughts, recently being in the Redwoods of Northern California, it's very otherworldly out there. All these films for Star Wars and Return of Endor, as I mentioned before, they use the earth, right? And it's how we have to imagine our stories. Even when we're creating these fantastical worlds and creatures, we're pulling from the stuff we know. And so, they can use green screens, and we can digitize definitely monsters of imagination. For sure we can. And much of the space ideas are very future set. There's a lot of futuristic, but when I was back in these redwoods, I saw Endor. I saw the past. I saw eternity. I saw time held still for thousands of years. A tree, the oldest tree, standing like 400. It was a sapling in 400 BC. Like, how can that be possible? It's amazing. And it's amazing that we come back to the tree, all the way back to the fairy tale. The stuff of our stories is made, whether it is the Western, whether it's in outer space, whatever frontier you find yourself, whether it's at home, hearthside, or set back in England, or overseas, somewhere in India, or in Africa, or down in Antarctica, or on the island of New Zealand. Wherever you make the world in your stories, wherever we find ourselves, humanity is always connecting to something real that they understand. And when astronauts go to outer space, they look back to Earth in awe. They're fascinated by it because it's our origin story. And no matter what frontier we go to, G.K. Chesterton was cleverly astute in saying that you can travel the whole world to find the perfect home. But it's when you look upon this hill and it feels like you found home at last, you realize it looks so familiar because it's where you began. So no matter how far afield we look, there's always this connection to that home somewhere in us. You can go as far away as you think, but there's something about wanting to preserve the heart of that forest, of that garden, of that place where we began. So Earth is just as much occupied in the story of the space opera. It too circles the sun in outer space. It's our home base, as it were. But let your imagination go as far as it'll take you. But as far as it'll take you, it takes all of humanity with you. So with that, good night, good morning, good day, whenever you listen. Thank you for being a listener of the Paper Cuts and Plot Twists podcast. We have 2 more episodes left of this season. I can't believe it. Thank you for being here.